Hey, Bena. Good morning, my relatives. This is Mark Charles. It is Thursday, July 15th, and I'm sitting down to drink my second cup of coffee. And there's a few things I want to discuss today. I don't have going to go in depth on a lot of things, but there's a few things I wanted just to highlight and bring to the forefront. But as I do before every live stream, I want to just acknowledge the land that I'm speaking to you from. So I live with my family in what's now known as Washington, D.C., and these are the traditional lands of the Piscataway. And I want to thank the Piscataway and honor them as the indigenous hosts of these lands. I want to thank them for their stewardship of the lands and just state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. You may say, well, you say this every time you speak, Mark. I do. I say this every time I speak, whenever I am able to say it. And it's because we are given a narrative by our country that these lands weren't stolen. We're given a narrative that these lands were discovered, they were empty, and that Western Europe and white Americans have a land covenant with the God of Abraham to live on these lands. And that's not true. And so as often as we can, we need to remind ourselves that there are indigenous peoples, indigenous nations who have been living here long before Columbus got lost at sea. And we need to acknowledge them. We need to acknowledge the treaties that were written. We need to acknowledge the rights of these people. And we need to be humble about our position and even our living in the lands where we live today. So I do this not only as a reminder to myself, but as a reminder to our population, to our country, and to the world that these lands were not discovered. Anyway, that's just one thing I wanted to start off saying this morning. There's a few things I wanted to discuss. Last night I was on a live stream on with Jay Winter Nightwolf, and you can look up his YouTube channel, and we were talking about voter suppression. And I've talked about this before, but I wanted to bring it up one more time because in the past few days, especially, there's been a lot of news about the laws being passed by Republican legislators around the country that are limiting voting and access to voting, and it appears to be directed mostly at people of color. And there's a lot of concern and talk about how horrible the Republicans are and how good the Democrats are about saving the voting rights of our nation. And this has been playing out largely in one place that's been primarily in the news has been in Texas, where actually all the Democratic members of their state legislature left the state. And they actually flew here to Washington, D.C. They've been meeting with representatives of both Congress as well as the White House. And they left so that there would not be a quorum back in the state of Texas, so that the bill that is currently before their legislature couldn't be passed. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has actually threatened these members of the Texas state legislature with arrest. And there's a lot of frustration that is boiling over. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because the narrative that we're being sold, the narrative that's coming out from all of the left-leaning based media, which is, except for Fox News and a few others, is, it's most of the media that we hear, almost all of the media we consume or that's really fed is left-leaning with a left-leaning bias. Some a little less left than others. But CNN, MSNBC, even ABC, NBC, CBS, they're all a left-leaning news bias. And the narrative we're being fed is that Republicans are bad and Democrats are good. Now, I do not disagree Republicans are doing things that are shameful. I absolutely agree with that. And they need to stop claiming this election fraud, trying to protect the American people from an injustice or a problem that doesn't even exist, and using these things to limit voters. That needs to stop. And I appreciate the effort that some of the Democrats are doing to address these things. However, we have to remember that the entire goal of our two-party system is to maintain the status quo. And the status quo is based on racism, sexism, and white supremacy. And neither party is interested in upsetting that equilibrium. Neither party. So last night on the show, where we were talking with myself and other Native leaders were talking about voter suppression in Indian country and talked about voting rights and how challenging it is already for people within Indian country to vote because of how far we live from the polls and the access we have and just things like that, and the fact that we're not campaigned to. And one of the things I brought up, as I brought up frequently throughout my campaign, is that if we're going to look at voter suppression, we have to look at the Electoral College, right? Which we see is very much in place to amplify the voice of the white landowning male from the 1% and to minimize the representation and the voice of everybody else. This is why we have an Electoral College. This is why 2 of our last 4 elections, the loser of the popular vote actually won the major vote, because this is what our system was set up to do. But what we need to, so we see this very clearly, right? Even in the nation I'm from, the Navajo Nation, we now have nearly 400,000 enrolled tribal members. We're the largest Indian nation, Native nation in the country now, with the largest landmass, almost 27,000 square miles. If we were a state, we'd be the 10th largest state. But because we're in the Four Corners and we have land in southeast Utah, northeast Arizona, and northwest New Mexico, and we don't have a full congressional district in any of those states, we have much less influence on the Electoral College. And we are the largest nation, both land and population-wise. And we don't even have a full congressional district within our reservation lands. And most reservations are small, very small compared to ours. And we've been spread out all over the country to the marginalized sections of this nation, which diminishes our influence on the Electoral College. This is why I began my campaign when I ran in 2020, by campaigning first and foremost. For almost all of 2019, I campaigned almost exclusively to Native nations. I didn't go to Iowa, I didn't go to New Hampshire. I went to Native nations to campaign first and foremost, because Iowa and New Hampshire are primarily, right? Iowa has the highest percentage of private lands. New Hampshire has the highest percentage of home ownership. Iowa has like it was the 5th whitest state in the country. New Hampshire is the 3rd whitest state in the country. Literally, our primaries are decided by running them through Iowa and New Hampshire. Our primaries, the people who get the greatest influence in our nation's presidential primaries, are white landowning men. And so I chose not to participate in that by not running in one of the 2 parties, the Democrats or the Republicans, by running as an independent, and by campaigning first and foremost to Native nations. So we have to acknowledge that the foundations were set up to exclude Native peoples. Second, we have to acknowledge that even in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution specifically excludes Natives, because we weren't taxed. So we were excluded from having any sort of voice in this government, this nation that was being built up literally not only around us, but on top of us, as they were committing genocide and ethnic cleansing of our peoples. They were literally building this nation on top of us, and we were not getting a voice in what was happening. And so acknowledging those 2 things. But then when we look at what's going on in the current situation, where we have to remember the 2 parties both have their own piece of the pie, right? It takes 2 parties to truly suppress the Democratic voice. And so the Republicans hate voters, right? They hate voters because the Republicans have a very explicitly white supremacist, racist, and sexist platform. Their base is not growing. And so they are terrified of voters. So the more people who vote, the less good it works out for Republicans. And so they are doing everything they can to limit or control the number of people who are able to vote. That is their plan. The less voters they have, the more likely, the greater the chance Republicans have of winning an election. That's their game plan. The Democrats, who have a much more diverse base, but they continually end up nominating status quo white people from the 1%. And so once they have their nominations, whether it's Hillary Clinton, whether it's Joe Biden, once they have their nominee, now they're afraid that their base, who do not see themselves being represented in these white status quo candidates, they're afraid their base is going to wander. And so Democrats are afraid of competition on the ballot. They're not as afraid of voters as they're afraid that their voters, once they see the nominee that the party has put forward, they're going to start looking for someone to vote for who more represents them. And so Democrats work hard to control who has access to the ballot. So Republicans hate voters and Democrats hate competition. And so they both work to suppress. The Republicans work to suppress the vote, and the Democrats work to suppress access to the ballot. And this is how they work in conjunction with each other. And they both decry and declare the villain as the opposite party, but they work together to suppress democracy. And this is no more clearly seen than in the For the People Act and the bills being passed by the Republican legislators around the country. So yes, the Republicans are doing what they do, which is limiting access to vote. The Democrats, they're calling themselves the good guys and saying, we're going to counter this. And we're going to give access to voting as freely as we can. And we're going to fight the evil Republicans. But if you read their For the People Act, there is, and I just point out one thing here, okay? In the 1970s, when we were passing major voter reform after the Civil Rights Movement, there was one of the parts of the reform that was being passed was actually found, this is the text of it. It says the National Committee of a political party, I have something in front of this, so I can't see the whole thing. I'm sorry, I can't see the whole text of that. The National Committee of a political party. Why can I not read beneath that? I really apologize. Let me bring it up on my own computer. I'm sorry about this. This is a little frustrating that I can't read it. I didn't think about this beforehand. Okay, here it is. The National Committee of a political party may not make any expenditure in connection with the general election campaign of any candidate for president of the United States who is affiliated with such party, which exceeds an amount equal to 2 cents multiplied by the voting age population of the United States as certified under subsection E. So basically, in the Voter Reform Acts in the 1970s, they passed a law that said the national parties can donate 2 cents for every age-eligible voter in the nation that the two parties put forward in their general election as their general election candidates. So there are over 200 million age-eligible voters within our country. So in the 2020 election, that meant the Republicans could donate directly to Donald Trump between $4 and $5 million to support his campaign. And it meant the Republicans could donate to Donald Trump, and the Democrats could donate to Joe Biden $4 to $5 million for his general election campaign. This is over and above the issue ads and other things they were doing. This could be donated directly for the expenditure of the candidate, and it was given over and above the donations by individuals. But they could donate 2 cents for every age-eligible voter. So they're about $4 to $5 million both parties could contribute to their candidates. In the For the People Act, they amended this in subsection 5214. And let me bring this up on my computer so I can read it as well. And what they said here is they made an amendment to this, and now it reads, the National Committee of a political party may not make any expenditure in connection with the general election campaign of any candidate for president of the United States who is affiliated with such party which exceeds not $4 to $5 million, $100 million. So what will take place if the For the People Act passes is in 2024, the Democratic Party will be able to donate directly to their nominee, and the Republican Party will be donate directly to their nominee $100 million. Now, this puts a huge deficit to any third-party independent candidate trying to run, because already there is a massive disparity in fundraising, right? I was one of the top fundraisers outside the two-party system in the last election. I was out fundraised only by a few candidates. The Green Party candidate and the Libertarian candidate fundraised more than me. There might have been one or two others, but even Brock Pierce and Kanye West, they had more money than me because they are both billionaires, but they didn't fundraise more than me. And we fundraised about $150,000. Now, Joe Biden, his political committee, I'm not talking super PAC money, I'm not talking his committee, his campaign fundraised $1.06 billion. I fundraised $150,000. That's like 1.5% of what the other party raised. All told, I think there were several billion dollars, $14 billion, I think, were spent on the entire presidential election. And so not only is there this huge advantage in fundraising that already exists on top of the super PAC and other money that gets spent and contributed, but now the two parties can donate an additional $100 million directly to their candidates. Now, it's important to note that the parties can fundraise differently than the candidates. So the candidates have a limit of $2,800 per donation, per individual, to donate to their campaign. The parties can fundraise up to $35,000 annually. And so what happens now is these wealthy individuals who in the past have been bundling money, which they can still do, but now they can max out their individual contribution to the candidate. Then they can donate another $35,000 to the party, and the party can collect enough of those type of donations where they can now have the $100 million to donate directly to the candidate. And of course, this is over and above the massive amount of money that they already have over and above other third-party independent candidates. And so the For the People Act, not only it absolutely limits the ability of third-party independent candidates to have a sway in these elections. And so again, we have to remember the Democrats are not the good guys. They're not. They are working just as hard as the Republicans to sway democracy and to impede democracy within our country. They just do a better job of PR, I think. They've been able to give out this narrative that they're actually for marginalized and minority communities when they're really not. And so, and the fascinating thing is the media has no interest in covering this. No one is talking about this, except for some of the third-party candidates. I saw something on the Green Party's platform about this in the bill. But no one's talking, the media isn't talking about it at all. Why? Because the media it's the two-party system. The Republicans aren't going to cry it out because this benefits them as well. The Democrats put it there, so of course they're not going to cry it out. And so they're two bullhorn pulpits, the left leaning and the right leaning media are not going to decry it or call it out because it supports their candidate. And so as a result, not only are we going to have diminished voting, we're going to have a harder time for third-party independent candidates to make up the fundraising disparities, because this For the People Act gives $100 million extra to the two major party candidates. So I just wanted to point this out. I wanted to actually show you the text so you could see it. We went from 2 cents for every age eligible voter, about $4 to $5 million in the last election, to $100 million if this bill passes in the 2024 election. And so let's just stop the BS that the Democrats are on the side of democracy. They're not. They're just fighting against a different aspect of democracy than the Republicans are. The Republicans hate voters. The Democrats hate competition. They both are working to suppress democracy. They both know that if we had true democracy in this country, the white landowning male from the 1% who controls both parties would not have near as much sway if we had a true democratic process here, but we don't. And so as the demographics of our nation are changing, the parties are doing things to make sure that the status quo is maintained. And both parties are doing it in conjunction, in partnership together. The other thing I just wanted to point out, I spent a little more time on that than I wanted to, but anyway, the other thing I wanted to point out is I tweeted this out this morning, which is just, if you're like me, you're sickened by what's going on with this private space race between Richard Branson and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, right? And it's kind of, I don't know if hilarious is the right word to use, but it's kind of sickening to use or to see in the midst of massive climate change, in the midst of a global pandemic where the only people who truly profited were the 1%, in the midst of racial crisis, not only here but around the globe, in the midst of massive income inequality, that our billionaires are having a space race. And they have a stated goal of colonizing the moon, Mars, and space. They have a goal. This is their goal. They've stated it. They're not even hiding their agenda. And so I want to share with you what I tweeted out this morning, where I said it's no coincidence that the white male billionaires currently engaged in a private space race with the stated goal of colonizing space, all hail from colonial nations that embraced and continue to utilize the doctrine of discovery. Richard Branson is from the UK. Elon Musk is from South Africa. Jeff Bezos is right here in the USA. This is what is sickening. We haven't learned anything, right? We haven't learned anything. We have been colonizing with impunity for hundreds of years under this dehumanizing church doctrine known as the doctrine of discovery. And as this globe is literally falling apart, we have the 1%, the white landowning billionaires from the upper echelons of the 1% on a space race to get off this planet and to colonize space and continue to exploit and destroy the rest of the universe. We've learned nothing. We've learned nothing. So we have to just call that what it is. It's cowardice. It's evil. It's colonial. It is completely narcissistic and self-serving. They don't give a damn about the world whose welfare they're living off of. They don't give a crap. And it's disheartening that we're holding them up as heroes. It's disheartening that we're holding them up as heroes. They're not heroes. They're cowards. They're cowards. So anyway, we just have to understand what these men are doing and what value system they're operating off of. And I lament what they're doing. I'm going to share once again, because this is so much about the doctrine of discovery. And I have this book I wrote on Selling Truth, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery. I'm doing a book study on it. I'm actually going to be doing another study tomorrow, going through chapter 8. We're going through chapter by chapter each week, and I'm going to go through chapter 8 tomorrow. I welcome you to join me. We'll do it on my social media. We stream it live on Facebook and on YouTube, and then we post it as well to Instagram and other social media, Twitter. But I welcome you to join me. I also am excited. I'm leaving on my first trip in a year and a half on Saturday. I'm flying to El Paso, Texas, and I will be up in Mescalero, New Mexico at a church there, speaking at a camp meeting. It's Mescalero Reformed Church, I believe it's called. I'll put more details up on my social media later this week. I don't actually have the promotional information yet, but once I get it up, I'll be preaching in their church this Sunday morning, and then I will be speaking at their camp meeting Monday night, Tuesday night, and Wednesday night. So I will be there for the week, and I'm looking forward to the event's going to be taking place outdoors. They're following the COVID-19 guidelines of the Apache Nation where they're living. I believe that's the lands they're on. And I've made sure that we're going to do, what is required to keep people safe. But if you're in the New Mexico area, I welcome you to come and hear me speak. I'm excited to have a chance to travel and to get back to New Mexico where I grew up. And I'm especially grateful that my first live speaking event after the pandemic is going to be in Indian country. And I'm looking forward to the chance to have these dialogues going on. I don't know if they're going to be streamed. I'm not sure what the internet access is like out there, but I am looking forward to being there, and I'll do my best to promote it when I can on my social media. So I hope everybody has a good day. I hope this gives you a few things to think about as you sit down to drink your second cup of coffee. I just have to acknowledge, I started drinking some Phil's coffee this past few months, and I'm really liking it. I don't know if you've ever been to Phil's Coffee, but I'm really enjoying some of their beans and some of the blend or the roast that they have, and I've been drinking that for the past few months. But anyway, I hope you have a good day, my relatives. Walk in beauty. And maybe we learn how to walk in beauty together. Ahiahat and hakonet.